Chapter 1. The Storm Beneath the Waves. The sea that morning lay calm, deceptively so. A pale sheen of light shimmered over its surface, but the waves rolled with a restlessness that whispered of something unseen. They surged toward the coast, not in gentle rhythm but in steady, forceful pulses crashing against the worn grey walls of the Saltford lighthouse. The sound echoed far along the craggy shoreline, carrying a faint warning of some coming storm. As the wind picked up, a large boat appeared from the mist, gliding steadily towards the narrow docking point below the manor. Its wooden hull creaked faintly as it nudged against the rocks, and a flurry of movement followed. Several passengers disembarked, clutching their hats and coats as the sea breeze tugged at them mercilessly. Their footsteps on the gangplank echoed sharply against the surrounding cliffs. Among them, a notably small man stepped off with measured care. His height barely reached the shoulder of the sailor assisting him, but his presence was immediately striking. His black overcoat was crisply pressed, his shoes perfectly polished despite the dampness, and upon his neatly combed head sat a bowler hat tilted ever so slightly. Most curious of all was his moustache, short, symmetrical, and remarkably stiff, unmoved even by the briny gusts whipping around him. He carried a single, small suitcase in one hand. Another man reached out instinctively to assist, but the little man raised a hand politely and said in a refined, deliberate voice, "Messy, but I prefer to carry it myself." With great care, he stepped onto the rocky path that led upwards, winding along the steep incline toward the manor. The stones were uneven, treacherous in places, and slick from the spray of the sea. Yet he ascended with calm precision, placing each foot as though calculating the exact angle and pressure required. He paused once, just long enough to glance up at the looming house above. Saltford Manor seemed almost to lean forward, as if straining to hear his approach. The windows stared blankly down, and the surrounding cliffs curved like the jagged teeth of some ancient sea creature. But the little man showed no sign of discomfort. He simply nodded, as if acknowledging an old acquaintance, and continued his climb. At the top of the path, near the manor's entrance, stood a woman. She was tall, elegant, and quite still, her hands clasped before her, and a pale blue hat perched delicately on her dark hair. As the man drew near, she stepped forward with a gracious smile. "Monsieur Poirot?" she asked. "The same," he replied, removing his hat with a slight bow. "I am Lady Amelia Grayson. My husband sends his regards. We are honored to have you with us." "The honor is mine, madam," Poirot said warmly. "It is not every day one is invited to such a picturesque corner of England." Amelia smiled faintly, though her eyes seemed to flick toward the sea. "Picturesque, yes," she said, "though the waves have been unusually restless. One hopes they are not a premonition." Poirot looked toward the horizon. "Ah, madame, the sea is like the soul. Sometimes it hides its turmoil beneath a very calm surface." Her smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Come inside, you must be chilled." She led him through the heavy oak doors and into the grand entrance hall. Saltford Manor was indeed magnificent, though it wore its age openly. The stone walls bore faded tapestries, and a vast staircase climbed upward like a winding spine. A butler appeared promptly to take Poirot's suitcase and disappeared without a word. "You are the final guest to arrive," Amelia explained as they walked down a wide corridor. "The others are already assembled in the drawing room. My husband, Mr. Grayson, will join you shortly. He has been, resting." Poirot raised an eyebrow ever so slightly but said nothing. He merely inclined his head. The drawing room was large, handsomely furnished, and dimly lit by a chandelier that swayed ever so slightly in the breeze, seeping through the old windows. Leather armchairs were arranged around a broad mahogany table. At the far end of the room, a fire crackled weakly in the hearth. As Poirot entered, conversation halted. All eyes turned to him. Amelia stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to present Monsieur Hercule Poirot." There was a moment of still silence, broken at last by a man seated nearest the fireplace. He stood, tall and confident, with fair hair combed back, and an expensive watch glinting on his wrist. "You're the famous detective, aren't you?" he said. "The one from Belgium. I've read about you." Poirot gave a modest nod. "I am flattered, monsieur. I'm Richard Grayson. My father mentioned you might be coming." Poirot extended his hand. "Enchanté." One by one, the others offered brief introductions. There was Jennifer, a young, efficient-looking woman who served as Mr. Grayson's personal secretary. She watched Poirot with sharp, curious eyes. Dr. Arnold, the family's longtime physician, gave a polite nod from behind round spectacles. Charlie, Grayson's business partner, was a rotund man with a ruddy face and a restless manner. And finally, Kate, a distant relative whose connection to the family remained vague, though her eyes lingered on Poirot with open curiosity. A maid entered, carrying a silver tray with tea and biscuits. As she moved between the guests, the tension in the room seemed to ease slightly. Richard sipped his tea and leaned toward Poirot. "Did my father mention why he wanted you here?" Poirot gave a slight shake of his head. "Only that it was an important matter. The details, he assured me, would become clear upon arrival." Amelia, who had been standing quietly by the door, suddenly spoke. "I'll check on him again. He had intended to welcome you himself." With that, she swept from the room. The guests resumed quiet conversation, though glances continued to drift toward Poirot. The detective sat calmly, his hands folded, his eyes moving slowly from face to face, taking in every gesture, every nervous tick, every carefully concealed glance. Several minutes passed before Amelia returned. Her expression was composed, but there was a slight tightness around her mouth. "My husband sends his apologies," she said. "He isn't feeling quite himself today. He wishes to rest and will meet everyone in the morning." There was a slight murmur among the guests, and then they began to rise, excusing themselves one by one. Soon the drawing-room was empty. Poirot stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the dark sea. The wind had grown stronger, and the waves beat against the rocks with mounting fury. "Something," he murmured to himself, "is not as it seems." He turned from the window, adjusted his tie, and followed the housekeeper, who had arrived, to show him to his room. Saltford Manor, it seemed, held its secrets tightly. For now, Chapter 2, The Window to the Sea. The morning sun had barely risen above the horizon, casting a pale golden hue across the slate roofs of Saltford Manor, when the stillness of the household was pierced by the hurried footsteps of Jennifer, Mr. Grayson's secretary. The corridors, usually quiet at this hour, echoed with a note of urgency as she approached the drawing-room, where several guests had begun to gather with bleary eyes and silent cups of tea. Jennifer entered abruptly, her face pale, her breath shallow. "Mr. Grayson is gone," she announced, her voice trembling, despite her attempt at composure. There was a collective pause, a shared silence that crackled with confusion. Amelia, standing near the hearth with a shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders, turned to face her. "Gone," she repeated, her tone edged with disbelief. "What do you mean, gone?" "His bed hasn't been slept in," Jennifer explained. "His room is empty. The window is wide open, of the one that looks out to the sea." A rustle passed through the room. As those seated exchanged quick glances, Richard Grayson, who had remained slouched in a high-backed leather chair, straightened, slightly frowning. Amelia took a step forward. "That makes no sense. My husband despises the cold. He wouldn't go out, not in the middle of the night. You must be mistaken." Jennifer shook her head. I think you should all come and see for yourselves." Poirot, who had been sitting silently in a corner, placed his untouched teacup gently upon its saucer and stood. "Lead the way, mademoiselle." The group ascended the grand staircase in a solemn procession. The morning chill lingered in the air, and the wind, though gentle, seemed to whisper along the stone walls with ghostly insistence. Mr. Grayson's bedroom stood at the far end of the east wing. Jennifer pushed the door open slowly, and the guests stepped into the cold, unoccupied room. The large bay window stood wide open, the curtains fluttering in the breeze. The sheets on the bed were perfectly smooth, untouched, as though no one had lain there during the night. Through the open frame, the sea beyond was a restless gray, its waves crashing rhythmically against the jagged rocks below. Amelia's breath caught as she looked around the room. He would never leave the window open, never. He hated drafts, always said the room must be kept warm at all times. Poirot stepped forward quietly, inspecting the room with the gentle reverence of a man walking through a memory. His sharp eyes scanned every corner. The mantel, the writing desk, the bedside table. Something on the nightstand caught his attention. A small porcelain Chinese figurine lay broken into several fragments. He knelt down and examined the pieces, his brow furrowing. "This," he murmured, "was not broken carefully." Jennifer leaned forward. "It wasn't like that yesterday. I dusted in here in the afternoon. It was whole then." Poirot gently gathered the shards. Whoever broke it was in haste, perhaps startled. They tried, clumsily, to reassemble it, then gave up. Kate, who had followed the group in silence, now took a step toward the open window and peered out. Could he have gone down to the rocks? Perhaps he needed air. Amelia shook her head. He wouldn't. He never even walked in the gardens at night, and he certainly wouldn't leave the room without his walking stick. "Just so," Poirot said, glancing around. "And yet, the stick is not here." Amelia paled. "It's missing." "It appears so," Poirot replied. He moved toward the open window, squinting into the morning light. He ran his fingers along the sill, examining the latch. Then, in the lower corner of the frame, something caught his eye. A sliver of fabric, a torn strip of silk, caught on the window catch. Poirot gently pried it loose and held it up. The piece was small, almost weightless, and of a fine make, deep blue, with a faint perfume lingering on it. Kate asked from behind him, "What is that?" "Perhaps," Poirot replied thoughtfully, "a clue." Outside the window, the ground was slick and damp from the previous night's rain. No footprints marred the earth, the moisture having erased any evidence of movement. The rocky ledge that sloped down toward the sea gleamed with dew. Charlie, Grayson's business partner, spoke up. "We should check the cliffs and the lighthouse. If he left this room, that's where he would have gone." Poirot nodded. "Yes, that is our next step." At that moment, Richard reappeared in the doorway. His face was drawn but composed. "Jennifer and I went ahead earlier down to the rocks. We found his walking stick, just above the high tide line." Amelia let out a soft cry and covered her mouth with her hand. No, that's not possible." Poirot placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "Madame, let us not yet assume the worst. We must go and see." The group made their way down the winding coastal path. The morning fog had thinned, but the sea still rolled below them like a great brooding beast. When they reached the cluster of cliffs, Jennifer was already there, holding a carved wooden stick in her gloved hand. Amelia hurried forward. "That's his. I'd recognize it anywhere." Richard folded his arms. It was only a matter of time. Amelia turned on him, her eyes blazing. "How can you say that about your father?" He didn't flinch, because he made enemies, and not just in business. He alienated people in town, even those closest to him. Poirot looked at him evenly. "Do you include yourself in that number, Monsieur Richard?" Richard met his gaze without hesitation. "If you're suggesting I pushed him over these cliffs, then you're wasting your time." Poirot didn't reply at once. Instead, he stepped closer to the edge, looking down at the rocks below. Waves crashed against the base, white foam spraying upward like fingers trying to grasp the air. Then he turned back to the group. "There's more to be understood here. Much more," he said softly. He took the walking stick from Jennifer and examined it carefully. It bore no unusual markings, no blood, no signs of damage. An ordinary stick, but its location was not ordinary at all. "Who found it?" he asked. "We did," Jennifer replied. "It was lying near that patch of heather, just beyond the flat ledge." Poirot walked to the spot, noting the incline and the way the ground dipped downward dangerously. A careless step here in the dark could certainly lead to disaster. But Poirot knew better than to accept such convenient explanations. After several more minutes of silent study, the group turned back toward the manor. The morning had grown brighter, but the mood remained heavy. All descended from the cliffs but Poirot, who lingered behind, standing perfectly still. He tilted his head slightly and inhaled. There it was again, a faint, strange scent, something delicate, but out of place. It was the same fragrance he had noticed in Mr. Grayson's bedroom, clinging faintly to the air. It wasn't sea salt, it wasn't damp wood, it was something else, a trace of perfume perhaps, or the ghost of silk. At last, he turned and walked back toward the house. There was, he thought, more than one mystery at Salford Manor, and someone among them was lying. Chapter 3. Shadows on the Cliffside. The sky was a dull pewter when the search resumed the following morning. A brisk wind blew in from the sea, rustling the trees behind Salford Manor, and sending sharp gusts through the craggy slopes along the coastline. A thin mist lingered along the cliff's edge, giving the day a mournful, almost funereal tone. Poirot stood in the entrance hall of the manor, fastening the buttons of his overcoat with great care. His hat rested at a precise angle on his head, and his gloved hands held a cane, more for balance than necessity. Around him, the others were assembling in subdued silence. "This morning," he announced clearly, "we shall make our way to the lighthouse and to the nearby cliffs. It is time we looked for Mr. Grayson with fresh eyes and clear minds." Amelia did not join them. She had taken to her room shortly after breakfast and had not emerged. Her grief, it seemed, had finally overcome her strength. "I cannot bear to look at the sea," she had said softly to Jennifer before retreating behind her door. Thus the search party consisted of Charlie, Jennifer, Kate, Dr. Arnold, and Poirot himself. They left Salford Manor in a slow procession, the gravel crunching beneath their feet as they descended the path that twisted along the edge of the cliff. Charlie walked ahead with Poirot, his eyes scanning the horizon with more frustration than hope. Behind them followed the others in quiet conversation. "Do you believe we'll find him?" Jennifer asked cautiously, her arms folded tightly across her chest. Poirot answered without looking back. "I believe we will find answers, mademoiselle. Whether they please us or not, we shall see. As they approached the rocks near the lighthouse, Kate gave a sudden cry and pointed. There, partially caught beneath a jagged stone, was a black coat, heavy and sodden from the sea air. Jennifer knelt and reached for it. "It's his," she said immediately. "Mr. Grayson's. I remember the buttons. They're engraved with his initials." Poirot took the coat gently and examined it. The fabric was stiff with dampness, and there was a faint trace of perfume, the same elusive scent he had noticed in Grayson's room. His fingers slid inside the inner pocket, and from within he drew a small slip of folded paper. It was a receipt. Poirot unfolded it with care. The print was smudged, but the message was unmistakable. A recent purchase of diamonds, several of high clarity and weight, and at considerable cost. He read it twice, then tucked it discreetly into his coat pocket. "This complicates matters," he murmured. Charlie raised an eyebrow. "How so?" Poirot merely smiled faintly. "The dead leave behind more than their bodies, monsieur. They leave questions. And this one," he tapped the pocket, "asks quite a few." They continued toward the lighthouse, its white tower standing stark against the gray sky. But when they reached the base, the heavy wooden door was shut and locked from within. Poirot tried the latch gently, then stepped back. "No answer," he said. "We shall return another time. It would not do to force an entrance." A short distance away stood a small, weather-beaten shack, barely more than a hut. Its roof was sagging, and its walls leaned slightly to one side, as though bracing against the wind. From within, smoke curled up from a narrow chimney. Poirot knocked softly, and after a moment, the door creaked open to reveal a small, hunched figure. The old man who stood there had squinting eyes, a scraggly white beard, and wore a thick jumper several sizes too large. "Good morning," Poirot said politely. "You must be Jonathan?" The man nodded warily. "That's right." Poirot removed his hat. "We are searching for a man, Mr. Grayson, who disappeared 2 nights ago. Did you see anyone passing by during the night?" Jonathan scratched his chin thoughtfully. I saw someone." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Someone?" "A man and a woman walked by close to midnight, I'd say, but I didn't see their faces. It was dark, and I don't concern myself with others' business." Poirot asked, "You didn't speak to them?" The man shook his head. "Not my place. I mind my own." Poirot nodded slowly. "Even so, your help is appreciated." He thanked Jonathan, and the group began their walk back toward the manor. The wind was colder now, sharper against their faces. Seabirds wheeled overhead, calling into the gray sky as the tide below crashed with increasing strength against the cliffs. As they walked, Kate stepped up beside Poirot. "There's something I should mention," she said quietly. Poirot turned his head slightly. "Yes, mademoiselle?" "I saw someone leaving the manor the night Mr. Grayson vanished. A man. I couldn't see his face clearly, it was dark, but he was heading toward the cliffs." Poirot stopped walking. The others continued ahead, unaware of the brief exchange. "And you did not think to share this before?" he asked, his tone calm but firm. "I wasn't sure it mattered. I didn't realize it might be connected. Besides, I didn't recognize him." Poirot gave a small nod. "Every detail matters, even the ones that seem trivial. You must tell me everything you remember by the time, his build, his clothing, anything at all." Kate looked faintly ashamed. "I'll try." They resumed their pace and rejoined the others. As Salford Manor came back into view, its tall chimneys rising against the fog-blurred sky, Poirot cast a final glance back toward the lighthouse. The mystery was deepening with each passing hour, and somewhere in this mournful house by the sea, the truth lay hidden beneath layers of silence, fear, and lies. Chapter 4. Accusations and Ink. The rain had returned by evening, tapping steadily against the tall windows of Salford Manor like a persistent question demanding to be answered. Outside, the sky hung low and leaden over the churning sea, its moans and crashes echoing faintly through the stone walls of the house. Inside the drawing room, a fire crackled half-heartedly in the grate. The air was thick, not with warmth, but with unease. Amelia sat in a high-backed chair by the window, her posture rigid, her eyes fixed on the darkened waves beyond the glass. Her hands, clasped in her lap, were perfectly still, but her fingers trembled ever so slightly. The rest of the household filed in quietly. Kate and Dr. Arnold entered first, followed by Charlie, who paused to pour himself a drink before taking a seat near the fireplace. Jennifer, pale and tense, slipped in last and sat silently at the edge of the group, her shoulders drawn in tightly. Poirot entered behind them, having taken a brief walk through the hallways before gathering them together again. Once everyone had settled, he cleared his throat gently. "Miami," he began, his voice calm and composed. "It is now clear that Mr. Grayson's disappearance is no ordinary matter. The sea may hide many things, but I am not yet ready to accept that it hides a man who simply walked out of his room, never to return. I must ask, do any of you suspect someone in this house?" There was a long pause. The sound of rain filled the silence. Then Amelia spoke, her voice surprisingly steady. "I suspect Jennifer." All heads turned sharply toward the secretary, who stiffened in her seat. "My husband was planning to dismiss her," Amelia continued. "He told me so himself, said she had made a serious mistake and he couldn't trust her with the company any longer." Poirot turned to Jennifer. "Is that true, mademoiselle?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." "He was going to let me go. Why?" Poirot asked simply. Jennifer's voice wavered, but she held his gaze. "I made an error in a business deal, a shipping contract. It was mishandled. If it hadn't been caught in time, it would have cost the company a great deal of money." Poirot folded his arms. "But you did catch it." "I did. I corrected it as soon as I realized the mistake. But it wasn't fast enough. Mr. Grayson told me he'd lost confidence in me, and that this week would be my last." "Yet you remained at Salford Manor." Jennifer nodded. "I stayed to prove I could fix it, that I wasn't incompetent. I needed to show him that he was wrong to give up on me." Poirot regarded her carefully. "A bold decision. Some would say driven." Before she could respond, a rustling sound came from the far corner of the room. Poirot's gaze shifted to Richard, who sat cross-legged in an armchair, sketchbook resting on his knee. He appeared unconcerned by the mounting tension, but was scribbling away with quiet intensity. "What are you drawing, monsieur?" Poirot asked. Richard looked up, brows raised. "Just clearing my head." Poirot walked over and held out his hand. "May I?" Richard hesitated. "It's personal." Poirot smiled thinly. "So are most of our thoughts, but if they offer clarity in a time of confusion, I must insist." Reluctantly, Richard handed him the sketchbook. Poirot flipped through it slowly, his expression unreadable. The drawings were rough but vivid, violent even. One sketch showed a man plummeting from a window, limbs contorted mid-fall. Another depicted a figure lying motionless on jagged rocks. Several others illustrated more elaborate scenarios, knives, ropes, drowning. "These are imaginative," Poirot said, his tone quiet but firm. "And disturbing." Richard shrugged. "It's just a way of venting, that's all. They bear a striking resemblance to Mr. Grayson's current predicament, especially this one. Poirot held up the drawing of the figure falling from the window. "I didn't kill him," Richard said quickly. "The drawings don't mean anything. You're sure of that?" "Yes, and even if I had wanted to kill him, which I didn't, I'd have nothing to gain. If you're looking for someone with something to gain, ask her." He jerked his head toward his mother. The room fell into a stunned silence. Amelia turned, stunned. "Richard," she whispered, "how dare you?" "You always said you loved him," Richard continued, "but you were always tired of him controlling everything. You knew about the money, the diamonds, the company. Don't pretend you didn't." Amelia stood up, trembling. "I did love him. Whatever faults your father had, I stayed by his side, not for money and for love." Jennifer spoke next, addressing Richard with a note of anger. "And what about those drawings? You show your father being tortured, killed, over and over. That's not just venting." Richard turned on her. "And you?" "My father was going to fire you for stealing company funds. If anyone had a motive, it was you." Jennifer's face went red. "That's not true." "Yes, it is," he pressed. "He showed me the financial records himself. You covered it up as a mistake, but he didn't buy it." "Stop it!" Amelia's voice rose above the din. "This isn't helping anyone. You're tearing each other apart, and we don't even know if he's dead." Poirot stepped forward, raising one hand to calm the room. "Enough." The silence returned. Outside, the wind moaned through the gutters and the rain had begun to fall more heavily. Soft at first, then pounding steadily as if washing away every unspoken word that clung to the windows. "I understand," Poirot said gently, "that emotions are high. Fear, anger, grief, they distort reason. But we must remain logical. The truth hides not in shouting, but in silence, in observation, in motive." He turned to the fire, staring into the flickering embers. "One of you is lying. One of you knows what happened to Mr. Grayson, whether he is alive or dead. And the truth." He paused, then looked at them all with narrowed eyes. "The truth is drawing near." Amelia sank back into her chair, tears now sliding silently down her cheeks. Richard folded his arms and looked away. Jennifer stared at the floor, jaw tight. Poirot moved toward the doorway but stopped before leaving. "I shall speak to the lighthouse keeper tomorrow morning. There is one man left who has not yet told his story." With that, he departed the drawing room, leaving behind a heavy hush, broken only by the storm outside and the unspoken doubts between those who remained. Chapter 5. A Debt in the Shadows. The fire in the drawing room had burned low, its last embers glowing faintly as the wind outside rattled the window panes. One by one, the guests of Saltford Manor had excused themselves from the tense gathering and retreated to their rooms, leaving the grand chamber silent once more. But Hercule Poirot remained behind, seated near the dying hearth, his small figure barely moving, except for the slow, deliberate rise and fall of his chest. His eyes, dark and thoughtful, fixed on nothing in particular. The crackle of the fire had long faded, replaced now by the distant sound of waves colliding with the rocks below. The cold in the room had crept in unnoticed, curling into the corners, pressing against the windows, sliding beneath the doors. Still Poirot sat, unmoving, absorbed by the fraying threads of the mystery, tightening around Saltford Manor. At last, he stirred. Without a word, he rose from his chair, buttoned his coat with mechanical precision, and crossed the room. The manor was quiet, every corridor dim and deserted. His polished shoes made no sound on the thick carpets as he stepped through the main door and into the biting night. The wind met him immediately, sharp, cold, and laced with sea salt. It howled across the cliffs like a restless spirit, tugging at the corners of his coat and brushing against his face. Yet Poirot pressed on, undeterred, his small frame moving briskly across the gravel path. The cliffs loomed ahead, dark shapes against a darker sky. Somewhere to the east, the lighthouse stood like a pale sentinel, its beacon unlit at this hour, though the waves below continued their endless booming chorus. As he neared the rocky bend leading to the lighthouse, Poirot slowed. A movement, faint, fleeting, caught the corner of his eye. He stopped, narrowed his gaze, and saw it again. A shadow, human in shape, barely distinguishable from the stone around it. Someone was there. Silently, Poirot continued forward, careful not to startle whoever it was. The outline became clearer. A figure stood near the edge of the cliff. No, two figures. One turned slightly, her face momentarily caught by the moonlight. Amelia, and beside her, close, too close, stood Charlie, Mr. Grayson's business partner. Poirot stepped forward fully now, his voice cutting cleanly through the cold night air. "Charlie, Amelia, what are you doing out here?" The pair turned at once, startled. Amelia's eyes widened, her breath visible in the cold air. Charlie stiffened but said nothing. "So late at night," Poirot continued, stepping closer. "Out on these dangerous slippery cliffs, the two of you, and I cannot help but wonder, if Mr. Grayson had seen this scene, what would he have thought?" Amelia stepped forward quickly, her voice shaking. "Monsieur Poirot, it's not what you think." "Then what is it?" he asked quietly, with just a trace of steel beneath his calm. She looked to Charlie, then back at Poirot. "Tell him," she whispered. Charlie exhaled heavily, running a hand through his hair. "Mr. Grayson knew about us, about our past, before the marriage." Poirot did not respond, only watched him intently. "Yes," Amelia said, stepping beside Charlie. "Grayson married me. But he never let me forget what came before. He knew about me and Charlie, and he used it to control me. Every time we disagreed, every time I tried to assert myself, he reminded me. He held it over me like a chain." Her voice cracked slightly. "I see," Poirot said softly. "And was it still going on, your relationship?" Amelia flushed but did not look away. "Not for years, but we never stopped caring about each other. Still, that doesn't mean we did anything to him." "Whatever you think of us," Charlie nodded. "We didn't even know he'd disappeared until the others did, I swear it." Poirot remained silent for a moment. Then, slowly, he reached into the inner pocket of his coat and retrieved a folded piece of paper. Its edges were scorched, browned and curling, but the words at the center were still clear. He handed it to Amelia. She opened it with shaking hands, her eyes scanning the text. A single sentence, written in Grayson's bald handwriting, stared back at her. "Lighthouse. Our debt must be repaid." Amelia looked up in confusion. "Her debt? What debt was he involved in? What was he trying to repay?" "That," Poirot said quietly, "is what I intend to find out." Charlie frowned. "The lighthouse? What does it mean?" "I was hoping one of you might shed light on that," Poirot replied, "but it seems the mystery continues to thicken." The wind rose sharply then, pulling at Amelia's coat and causing her to step back instinctively from the edge. The sea below growled louder, waves crashing violently against the base of the cliffs. "This is no place for conversation," Poirot said, his voice firmer now. "You should both return to the manor. The cliffs are treacherous in this wind, and it would not do for another person to vanish." Amelia hesitated, glancing once more toward the sea, then nodded. Without another word, The two of them turned and began making their way back toward the house, their silhouettes quickly swallowed by the dark. Poirot remained behind for a moment longer, staring toward the lighthouse, now no more than a pale outline beyond the mist. The letter still weighed heavily in his coat pocket. A debt to be repaid. A man who vanished, a house full of secrets, a storm still lingering. Slowly he turned and followed the same path back to Saltford Manor. His footsteps were steady, deliberate. His thoughts, however, raced with silent intensity. The puzzle he knew was nearing its final shape. The pieces were aligning. Motives, movements, lies tangled in truth. Soon it would be time to draw them all together. When that moment came, Hercule Poirot would be ready. Chapter 6. The Body Beneath the Beacon. The wind had changed. That morning Saltford Manor awoke not to bird song or lapping waves, but to the fierce roar of a gale rolling in from the sea. The sky was heavy and gray, its clouds torn like fabric across the horizon. The trees bent and groaned under the pressure of the gusts, and the shutters on the upper floors rattled like anxious fingertips against glass. Inside the manor, the breakfast room was warm, though the storm's presence could not be ignored. Poirot sat alone at the table, sipping his tea, the saucer beneath trembling faintly with the vibrations of the wind. The fire cracked behind him, but his thoughts were colder, turning ever more intently toward the puzzle of Mr. Grayson's disappearance. Then came the footsteps, rapid, hurried, followed by the breathless voice of Jennifer. "Monsieur Poirot." He looked up sharply. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, and she was visibly shaken, her breath catching as she leaned against the doorway. "They've found him," she gasped. "Mr. Grayson. His body has been found." Poirot set down his cup without a word. "In the lighthouse," Jennifer continued, clutching the edge of the table. "In the basement, soaked through. Dr. Arnold and Charlie are already there. They're waiting for you." "Take me," Poirot said immediately. Kate and Amelia, having overheard the commotion from the corridor, joined them as they set out across the estate. The wind outside clawed at their coats and scarves, and the sky above seemed to grow darker with every step. The path to the lighthouse, though familiar by now, had never felt so ominous. The waves below crashed harder than ever, foaming white and wild against the jagged rocks. The lighthouse loomed like a watchful eye in the storm, tall, still, and unforgiving. At the base of the structure, the group was met by Charlie and Dr. Arnold, both pale and silent. Charlie's jaw was tight, and the doctor's eyes were somber. "This way," Arnold said quietly, leading them inside. The stone staircase spiraled downward into the basement. The walls were damp, the smell of salt and mildew sharp in the air. And there, at the far end of the cold, wet floor, lay the body of Mr. Grayson. Amelia let out a sharp gasp and turned away, pressing her gloved hand to her mouth. Kate steadied her, her own face pale. Poirot stepped forward. The body was twisted slightly on its side, the clothes drenched, hair flattened, and skin pallid. The water had soaked through every layer. Grayson's eyes were shut, his expression strangely peaceful, as if sleep had only just claimed him. Poirot knelt with care and examined the body. His trained eyes scanned every detail, and then stopped at a mark behind the left ear. "A wound," he said grimly, leaning closer. "Blunt force, a heavy object. This was not an accident. He was struck, and struck hard." Dr. Arnold joined him, kneeling beside the corpse. "Yes, there's blood here," he confirmed. "It's consistent with a fatal head trauma. He was most certainly killed." Poirot reached gently into Grayson's waistcoat pocket. and found a folded letter, still surprisingly intact, despite the damp. He opened it slowly. In the same handwriting as the partially burned letter he had found days earlier, were the words, "Meet me at midnight inside the lighthouse. A debt must be repaid." Poirot said nothing at first, but his expression hardened. As he leaned in again, another detail caught his attention. A faint scent, oddly out of place. It was not the dampness of seawater nor the cold stone floor. It was that same elusive fragrance. Light, powdery, unnatural. He had first sensed it in Grayson's bedroom. Again near the cliffs and now here by the body. As he stood, he noticed something else. A white handkerchief near the corpse, partially tucked beneath the arm. He picked it up and unfolded it. Embroidered in the corner were initials, C.T. He turned to Charlie, who stood a short distance away, frowning at the scene. Poirot held up the handkerchief. "Do you recognize this?" Charlie stared at it for a long moment. "Yes," he said finally. "It's mine. But I've no idea how it got here." "You are certain?" "I wouldn't lie about this," Charlie said, clearly shaken. I must have lost it. I don't remember when, but I swear, I wasn't here last night." Poirot's face gave away little. He folded the handkerchief and placed it in his pocket. "We shall examine that claim later," he said simply. Jennifer, standing behind them, whispered, "He must have come here alone." To beat someone, but who? Poirot did not respond. Instead, he looked again at the body, the placement, the wound, the letter. This had not been random, it had been planned, and the lighthouse, quiet, remote, overlooked, had been chosen for a reason. Carefully, Poirot rose and turned back to the others. "We must return him to the house," he said solemnly. This changes everything." The descent from the lighthouse was slow, reverent. Together they helped carry the body from the basement, through the narrow stairwell, and into the gray light of the storm. The wind had lessened, but the air remained heavy, as though nature itself understood the gravity of what had occurred. They reached Saltford Manor by late morning. The body was placed in the drawing room, now cleared and silent, and covered respectfully. Amelia sat nearby, quietly weeping. Kate stood beside her, whispering words of comfort. Jennifer remained by the window, staring out, arms crossed tightly. Charlie paced by the fireplace, his mind clearly racing. Dr. Arnold stood alone, deep in thought. Poirot stood apart, eyes lowered in contemplation. The storm outside may have begun to fade, but within these walls, the turbulence had only just begun. Chapter 7. The Final Light. The following morning dawned with an almost sacred quiet. The storm had passed and Saltford Manor stood beneath a serene sky. Gentle sunlight poured over the cliffs, casting a golden hue upon the rugged rocks. The sea, which had roared and crashed for days, now moved with the calm rhythm of breath. It was as though the entire coast had exhaled. Inside the manor, the mood was hushed. Servants walked softly, as if not to disturb the air. In the drawing room, chairs had been arranged, the fire in the hearth gently crackling, bringing warmth to the high-ceilinged space. One by one, the residents and guests gathered, faces worn from sleepless nights, eyes shadowed with questions. They waited. Hercule Poirot entered with his usual precision. His posture straight, his gaze calm, his appearance immaculate. Today he had not come to investigate, he had come to reveal. He stood before the assembled group and spoke with quiet authority. "Mes amis," he began, "the time has come to uncover the truth. What has been hidden must now be seen." All eyes turned to him, as though a string had pulled each gaze at once. Poirot's eyes landed on Amelia, seated closest to the fire. She sat still, composed, but pale. "Madame Grayson," he said, "you lived under the pressure of a secret, your past with Mr. Charlie Trent, and you feared your husband would reveal it, using it to shame or punish you. But you did not kill him, because while your fear was real, you knew the cost of violence was too high." Amelia closed her eyes, relief mixed with grief. Poirot then turned to Charlie. "Mr. Trent," he continued, "your handkerchief was found near the body. That discovery might have condemned you, but it was not you who placed it there. It was taken from you, stolen, and used as a false trail. You too are innocent." Charlie's fingers loosened around the arm of his chair. "Dr. Arnold, Miss Kate." Poirot nodded toward them. "You have been helpful witnesses. But your hands are clean." They nodded silently. Next, Poirot's attention shifted to Richard. "Monsieur Richard," he said, "your relationship with your father was strained. That much is clear, and your sketch is dark, morbid. They speak of anger. But drawings are not deeds. You expressed pain, but you did not act on it. You are not the killer." Richard's lips parted slightly, but he said nothing. His hand gently closed the sketchbook on his lap. Then Poirot turned to Jennifer. She had remained quiet, hands folded tightly, eyes downcast. But now she looked up. "Miss Jennifer," Poirot said, "you committed the murder." Gasps sounded in the room. "You had motive, opportunity, and most critically fear. Mr. Grayson had discovered your embezzlement of company funds, a betrayal of trust that could have destroyed your career. He told you so himself, that your name would be ruined, that no one would hire you again. He intended to expose you." Jennifer's breath caught. "You were desperate," Poirot continued. "You lured him to the lighthouse with a note, 'Meet me at midnight. A debt must be repaid.' He went, unaware of your intentions. Perhaps you didn't plan to kill him, not at first. But when he laughed, mocked your pleas, and dismissed your fear, something in you broke, and so in a moment of panic, you struck." Jennifer's voice trembled. "I only wanted him to listen, to understand. I begged him, but he wouldn't stop. He told me I was finished, that no one would ever trust me again. I just lost control." Poirot gave her a moment, then said, "Your fear didn't end with the act. You attempted to cover it. You placed Charlie's handkerchief near the body to mislead us, but there were things you could not erase." He raised one hand. "First, the perfume, subtle, unique. I noticed it in Mr. Grayson's room. I noticed it on the cliffs. And I noticed it again on the body." Poirot raised a second finger. "Second, the broken Chinese doll, a gift from Mr. Grayson to you. You disliked it, you broke it. That fragment of anger was left behind." Then a third finger. "And finally the letter. The one you wrote to summon him. I recognized the handwriting. You write the letter A in a distinctive way. Slightly slanted, reversed. I saw it in your company documents. And I saw it on that note." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she whispered. "I didn't mean to." Poirot's voice softened. "Perhaps not. But it did happen." He turned to the others. "Justice must be served." At that moment, footsteps echoed in the hallway. 2 police officers appeared at the doorway. Poirot looked toward them. "Gentlemen," he said, "this is your suspect." Jennifer stood slowly. She did not resist. The officers moved forward. She looked at Poirot one last time. "I'm sorry," she said. He gave a slight nod. "That is for the law to weigh." She was escorted out. The door closed gently behind them. The room remained quiet for a long time. Then Amelia spoke. "Is it really over?" Poirot turned to her. "Yes, madame, the waves have stilled, the truth has risen." Outside, the sea was calm. The next morning, Poirot packed his belongings. The manor stood quiet as ever. He passed the now familiar corridors with silent footsteps. At the entrance, Amelia stood waiting. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot," she said. "You gave us answers, even if they were hard." "Better a hard truth than a comforting lie," Poirot replied. He walked down the stone path, toward the cliffs. The breeze was gentle now. The lighthouse stood tall against the morning sky. At the cove below, a small boat waited. Poirot stepped aboard. He did not look back. The mystery of the lighthouse was behind him, and the sea was finally quiet. Epilogue. A quiet departure. Several days had passed since the arrest, and Saltford Manor, once buzzing with tension and whispered suspicions, had returned to its natural stillness. The rooms no longer echoed with questions. The waves, which had raged for so long beneath the cliffs, now lapped gently at the shore, not joyous, but calm, as if in mourning. Jennifer's name no longer passed from room to room. The guests had departed, each taking with them a version of events they would carry for the rest of their lives. The memory of Grayson lingered, not as the man he claimed to be, but as the one his silence left behind. Amelia resumed her place at the heart of the manor, quieter now, though perhaps freer. Richard, it was said, returned to his art with new clarity. His sketches no longer dripped with rage, but hinted instead at understanding, of loss, of fragility, of justice. Poirot, always discreet, made no grand farewells. He left in the early light, suitcase in hand, the sea breeze tugging gently at the edge of his overcoat. At the lower cliff, the same small boat that had brought him to Saltford waited patiently. He turned once, just once, to look back at the manor, the lighthouse rising beyond it, like a final exclamation mark on a mystery resolved. There was no satisfaction in his eyes, only peace. For Hercule Poirot did not chase vengeance, he sought order, truth, and in that pursuit he had once more delivered both. As the boat drifted from shore and the cliffs of Saltford faded behind him, Poirot took out a small notebook and made a single note beneath the day's date. Murder is not born of wickedness alone. Sometimes it is fear wearing desperation's mask. And with that, he closed the book, folded his hands, and turned his gaze out to sea, to the next place where order had yet to be restored. And that concludes today's journey into the shadows of mystery and deduction. What did you think of this case? Did you see the twist coming, or did it catch you by surprise? Share your theories and favorite moments in the comments below. Love to hear your take. And if you're craving more thrilling detective tales, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss the next mystery. Until then, stay curious. The next clue might be closer than you think.